Okay. Okay, let's do this. Hello everyone, welcome. Welcome to another coffee shop Wi-Fi episode. And last night something occurred to me which never had before. And I felt compelled to speak about it. Okay. Alright, let's get into it. I would like the viewers to look at the screen. I'm going to open the notepad. So, why would somebody say God is alone? Very unique statement. Now, God is alone, this is not often heard, but something that's often heard is God alone is. So, in some sense, I'm going to explain to the viewers how I went from God alone is to God is alone. And so, anybody who's an expert in theology and whatnot, or any theologians who tune into this talk, feel free to, edit my lines of reasoning. This is how I'm going about my explanation. So pretty much this episode includes an explanation of how the sentence God is alone makes sense. Pretty much that's the objective I'm putting for myself here. Now we have a sentence, man is made in the image of God. Okay? Now, with these two statements in mind, man is made in the image of God, and God alone is, okay? So I'm pretty much saying, wait a minute, let's see theologically if there's something that, this is what makes sense to me. So I'm saying, if God made man in his image, and man experiences his consciousness as alone, then man is made in the image of a God that is alone. And this might sound strange, but I was thinking that this sentence, man is made in the image of God. I mean, here, I forgot to mention something. In monotheistic religions, there is the idea that God is inconceivable. And so, as someone born in the country Iran, which is a theocratical society, you look at the West, you see church and state have separated. But in Iran, mosque and state have not separated. And so as a kid growing up, seeing everybody like having to know religion because it's rooted in the political system, in the society. So it was as if as a kid growing up in a world where everybody is praying. You can hear the call of prayer even from different mosques in Iran, right? And so as a young kid, I was like, yo, what is everybody paying attention to? What is everybody praying to? And this was the incredible thing, that God is considered inconceivable, yet the concept of a creator is conceivable. So it's as if this is the bizarre thing, that God is inconceivable, but the idea of a creator is conceivable, and mankind is in some sense, the religious folk are paying attention to an inconceivable creator, which in some sense is bizarre, is such a fascinating idea, because the creator part, I mean, here, inconceivable creator, right? The inconceivable part points to no shape. The creator part points to something creating shape, so it must have shape. At least that's how we see it. Of course, there's the argument of the infinite regress. So pretty much, I'm like, what is everybody worshiping? And they were worshiping the inconceivable. And to wonder how it's even possible to worship an inconceivable being. So, where am I going with this? I'm pretty much getting to this idea that man is made in the image of God, theological statement. Another theological statement, so here, let me turn these into, so one, God equals inconceivable. That's the first point. And then two, we have man equals man is made in the image of God. Or no, here, let me rephrase this argument. So it would be, actually, man is made in the image, okay, first line, conscious human experience finds itself isolated in a way that no one can truly see it. People can say, you know, people agree, people understand each other, but in reality, because we're different beings, different occupants of this, different moments in the space-time continuum, so pretty much consciousness is an alone experience. So it would be Okay, I gotta start over. 1. Consciousness. Consciousness is alone. First thing. Man is made in the image of God. Second thing. 3. If man's intelligence is alone, consciousness is alone. Man is made in the image of God. God is alone. There we go. Three simple lines. So what do I mean consciousness is alone? You know, there is so many people who in mystical traditions, meditation practices, whatnot, they come to an understanding that life is non-dual. And I was thinking in some sense that in order for life to, for all those people who experience oneness, I don't know, for a second I thought if God has no partner, God is alone. If God is alone, imagine what great being you have to be, that you're alone in a world and you create worlds for other beings so they don't have to be alone. Do you see? For the first time in my life, last night when I was in my bed, for a second I was like, yo, I'm thinking I'm alone. And I'm thinking I'm alone because I have an inner realm that nobody sees, nobody can see in the way I see. And similarly, I can't see other people's inner realms in the way they see them. So there is a sort of experiential loneliness within one's own existential position. We cannot ignore this. This might sound strange, but literally the biological body is like an Iron Man suit and something is stationed in it. Okay, mainly because it is transporting itself. The body's like a vehicle that it goes with the same speed as the world, hilariously. So imagine Tony Stark is the real self. The Iron Man suit is his, shape, self, and whatnot. His ego. And Jarvis is the logos. The Jarvis inside the Iron Man suit where Iron Man talks to. I mean, somebody, like when Iron Man talks to Jarvis, somebody could be like, yo, buddy, are you insane talking to, non-existential entities? And Tony Stark would be like, yo, man, it's a program, relax. There's moments where there's moments when you notice that you are being something, and the nature of what you're being has its own value and merit. From one view, we're just plants in a garden, and the purpose of life is to just exist in the same way like a flower exists, in the same way like, birds and other species exist. They're just happy to be part of the existential program. But really, what has changed and what has evolved us has not been happiness. It has not been comfort. What has evolved us has actually been opposite of what we're looking for. You know what it is? I sometimes think it like a flipperoo, right? Imagine it was the other way, where everybody was trying to be sad because they were happy all the time. They were so freaking happy all the time that there was nothing else. They were bored of just one state all the time, right? So imagine in a parallel universe, sad beings are trying to attain happiness, right? And in another reality, happy beings are trying to attain sadness. Or imagine in one side of the coin, temporary beings are seeking like eternity, immortality, and on the other side of the coin, eternal beings are seeking non-existence. I don't know why, but to me, I'm seeing, like, as the poet Rumi says, there is a freedom through a crevice you can barely see. So, I'll go over the argument again, what I'm saying here. So, I'm saying if consciousness is alone, if man is made in the image of an inconceivable creator, then an inconceivable loneliness is God's reality. So I'm saying, like, alright, right now I'm a human being, there's other physical human beings around me, but, you know, my mind is its own space, its own world. So I think it's fair to say that a human being, like, think about it, you're a human being, how many thoughts of different senses of self have you had throughout your lifetime? And you have been watching and going through all those senses of selves. And for a moment I thought that what if this oneness and non-dualism everybody is seeking is the same sort of oneness that our consciousness is the unifying witness of all the various thoughts that come in our inner realms, and if we were to think that the world is the mind of an advanced being, then everything happening in the world seems to be the thoughts of that advanced being. You see, my argument is, man is made in the image of God. Man finds himself like this soul alone in this world. And so, similarly, if God is alone, it would explain so many things. It would explain why it's looking at its creation rather than attending to its peers, right? It would be as if, like, somebody, you know, who's like, I don't know, imagine somebody who's in high school, like, tutoring kids in middle school, but the whole time feeling like he should be in university. You know what I'm saying? If God is alone, just take in this idea, it means God has nobody else. Do you understand? That means, and what is divinity? All those people who went and became alone. They went into their solitude. And they realize that because nobody gets out of here alive, might as well see what it is. If God is alone, it's a suggestion that God is dreaming. And it's also, there's this hadith in the Sufi tradition. I don't know how authenticated this is, but you know, some people consider it. It's this hadith called Hadith Qudsi, and it's pretty much like from the point of view of God, where God is saying, I was unknown and I created the world to be known. What that means is God, imagine an inventor on an island that was so alone on this island that he finds the resources and the tools and makes an invention. And he's waiting for his invention to acknowledge him. This might be one of the most bizarre ideas I've ever had in this lifetime. But God may be waiting for us to play. Do you understand? Imagine an inventor on an island creates an android. And then the android, in some sense, is trying to figure out what it is, and the inventor is just waiting for the android to notice the inventor, and so they can establish a connection. Do you understand? What really life is that something is required, because why else would you exist? Do you understand? Existence is an action. Why this action? You know, there's something within me which I know. You know, there was a time where, this is years ago, when I was living with my parents, and I remember I was rude. Once I was rude to my parents, and my mother turned to me and told me I'm heartless. And that was so soul crushing. That was soul crushing, but it was necessary, because I began to think, am I heartless? Am I just a program? Am I just some sort of expression? Or is there something more? And you know what I realized? This decade of giving these Mr. Within talks, it has actually transitioned me from a emotional entity to more a being that has to see and then it feel. Right? Because there's different people. You know, when you look at a child, children feel without consideration. Something that I remember my mother told me when I was young also, there was this guy named Ibn Sina, this Persian scholar. And this guy was so polite. And everybody would come up to him and say, hey man, in this savage world where everybody's like savage, how are you being so polite? How are you so polite in a very unpolite world? Which is another way of saying, how are you being happy in an unhappy world, or how are you being efficient in an inefficient world? And you know what this guy says? He says the most amazing thing. He says, I learned to be polite from the rude. All you beings who feel your suffering, all your suffering and problems are learning pivots. They're pivotal learning moments. Because let me tell you something bizarre that's been happening from the beginning of everybody's birth. It just keeps going. It just goes on. To a point where, you know, like we're temporary beings, we should be counting every day, right? Like we should be counting every day, like for 100-year lifespan. Yeah, I made it this day, this day, this day. But because we experience so many days of self-simulation, after some point, it's not important. Like, you know, people are emotional. People suffer because of their senses of self. But if I ask you, like 10 years ago on a Wednesday, how did you fucking feel, or what did you eat? Like, you don't remember. Do you understand? So this means that human suffering is just momentary because it doesn't like how it's simulating itself. You know, I have, you know, there's a time where usually I've read too many wisdom quotes on patience to some degree where I normally don't get upset, but after a certain boundary, do you know, let me tell you what makes me angry. It's not nice to share, but I will tell you what moments in this life where I have felt like something has like released my rage. Okay? And it's something that in some sense doesn't see what it's doing, and what it's doing is having an influence. This is literally tyranny. Tyranny is equivalent to like somebody doing something and not caring how everybody else feels. Do you see? One thing I realized is that I am not here for myself, or my mind would be enough. And because there is the mind of others, the purpose of life is not to just learn from our own mind, you know? To be honest, more and more I'm realizing that more than it's like a spiritual hierarchical system, it's just a responsibility level. So what that means is, imagine there's a bunch of stuff in a room. And imagine there's like 100 beings in that room. Now there's 100, let's say there's like 1,000 stuff in a room, there's 100 beings in that room. Now you begin to see one being is like responsible for 2 stuff. You know, they're taking care of 2 things in the room. You see then one being is taking care of like 800 stuff in the room. They have that responsibility level. Then you see some being who has no responsibility level. Suffering is a sign of a being that has not understood where it is to engage it, to find a way to work through it. We suffer because our sense of inner self gives up. Because if it didn't give up, if it doesn't give up, we don't know how, like if the suffering is going to end or not, right? So we suffer when we stop. It's another way of saying like a person 100% has a problem when they stop finding a solution. You know, when we accept our suffering, it's like somebody being like, "Oh man, I got a problem." And Buddha was like, yo, sit down by this tree, close your eyes, and realize everything and nothing is 2 eyes of the same moment. There's a spectrum of manifestation and different minds open to it differently. There is a connection with something that is not human here. Having a relationship with dehumanized senses of being is something that people have to be careful for, because if you have not been acquainted, this is why if I see like a 14-year-old kid like channeling or like thinking like, you know, they're contacting, like being theosophical or esoteric, I'll be like, okay kid, you know, it's like first go learn from the self that you can be stable in. That means once we are comfortable being human, we can be anything actually. But because we're not comfortable being human, there's fear of what else you might be or you can become. Do you know? Keep this in mind, guys. We fear anything we haven't understood yet. You know, it's like especially it's like some guy trying something and then thinking what he's doing is making sense, and then suddenly like you know, getting rejected to such a degree that you suddenly snap out of what you thought was correct, you know? This life is fascinating. It's like everything is here to show you that you're not just that. In a changing world, I mean, we're acting like temporary beings. So what are we? Are we the thing that's changing, or are we the change? Are we the force, or are we what the force is moving? Spiritual people, I think they think they're the force. Religious people, I feel like they feel the force moving. And a secular person is, in some sense, they don't care about that kind of force. You see, because the idea is that, all right, if we apply Occam's razor, what's the simplest way that reality can be accessible? In the simplest way, which means only the sensory perception. Wow. It's kind of like God is not alone in its outer, like, I shouldn't say it like this. If the humanized view of the idea of God, in the sense of if consciousness is alone, if man is made in the image of God, then God is alone. Our consciousness is made in the image of a being that is alone with itself, but not to itself, which is the same way of saying, like in the Castaway movie, that guy was alone on an island, but because he had made the volleyball into a face, he was not alone to himself. So it's another way of saying, what I'm saying is, not per se All right, back. Now, guys, keep in mind, this is one way to kind of prove that the inconceivable is lonely. The inconceivable is lonely, or an eternal being decided to turn itself, oh my God, into a world so within itself it can never be alone. Oh my God. That means I'm pretty much saying, what if this world started from an eternal being that was never born, never created, and this eternal being was so alone that it had to turn itself, part of its power, to turn itself into a world where multiple beings could exist. Do you understand? It's as if, like, they say like Christ died for our sins, and it's kind of like God made the world for our sins to in some sense be overcome. What I'm trying to say is that as I am being a temporary biological existential entity experiencing this moment on the surface of this rock in the middle of nowhere, simultaneously the eternal host of the presence of this universal sector is alive within everything, and it can communicate not through the language of words, images, or ritual, but through the language of the intentions of the unsealed heart. Which is another way of saying when you start hearing the heartbeat of not yourself, not the heartbeat of your species, even though that glorious day will come, but you will hear the heartbeat of the universal sector, and for the first time you will realize that all beings from the lowest worlds to the highest worlds have an instantaneous authority to contact the eternal, that which is eternally alone awaiting. You know what it is? For the first time in my life, you know, I've looked at religion from multiple angles, but it's like it's not man that's waiting for God, it's God that's waiting for man. You see, there's a picture, I'm gonna show you this picture. It's the picture Michelangelo drew on the Sistine Chapel, and it's called The Creation of Adam. And in this image, it's such a masterpiece. Sorry, I think this was drawn by Raphael. Oh no, it was drawn by Michelangelo, actually. So in this picture, what you see is a clueless Adam, and in some sense, a God that is just waiting for one intent of man, to care to know where he is. The divine is not an idea, it is a power, and we human beings shape up ourselves into ideological entities, and what do we seek as an idea? Power. But what is power? In a universe. That means it's like the question goes, it's like, is this world the life of a human being? Is this world the life of a species? Is this world the life of a planet? Is a planet living here? Is a galaxy living here? Is a universe living here? Is the whole cosmos living here? Is the inconceivable living through how it is its own conception? What else can eternity do in the void? It can transform it. The genius of the infinite. That means, you know, this whole time I've been giving talks, I've been thinking that immortal beings are getting bored. They're like, in the future, if we become immortal, like, what are we going to do? Like, walk around the whole cosmos? Like, we're going to get bored as immortal beings. And I was like, yo, man, they're going to get bored, and they're going to, like, probably go towards dehumanized states and non-existence. But now I'm seeing another way. That immortality becomes so second nature that eternity becomes to be a being, to be in some sense a field rather than a particle in the field becomes the reality. And this is the picture I was talking about, by the way. Do you see? Look at it. It's as if Adam has no idea that there is something staring at him. That in some sense the archetype of the father, you know, one thing I thought, like, that was, you know, for me, I have my own unique views on religion, which I think many will find odd. I see prophets as time travelers. To me, God is the future self of all beings in reality, which is a timeless collective being which at any moment now can access now. So pretty much what we think our guardian angels are, what we think God is in this era, is actually in the future. Like, it's our future selves, but our future selves are not human. So to us, they appear as the transcendental other of this lifetime. It's so remarkable. You know what it is? It's kind of like we're inside the mind of a being that if it instantly by the whim, that means, you know what it is? I have seen, I'll be honest, I have, you know, I've said in this talk something I've seen as a child. I've been able to see karma and how moments build up and suddenly animate. It's kind of like a cup like watching a cup, and as it's being filled up to the brim, you're getting a sense of like the outcome. Ultimately, a person's mind and psychology is an interface, okay? It's like some people are using MacBook, some people are using PC, like Windows, Linux, OS X, right? These are different softwares. When you look at human beings, their bodies are the hardware, the DNA, right? And their mind is the software. And what do you do when you get a computer, right? Either the software is installed in it already, or you install new software. When we install new software, this is the whole nature-nurture debate, right? So in some sense, your mind, literally your mind is like a computer, and your experiences are how you're installing software. You know, memories are like, you know, the files being saved, you know. Seldom is this said, but where the attention of the majority goes, reality gets a priority to manifest there. If human beings think this world is, you know, a bad place, literally bad stuff is like we're expecting it. But if the species expects advancement, if the species expects greatness, if suddenly we see a future where like a fast-forwarded film, do you know, everything, you know, sometimes I have this vision in my inner realms where I'm walking, and as I'm walking, I feel like I'm this wind, and this wind, as it goes forth, it's as if the advanced civilization, imagine you press a button and everything you see, which is like this, you know, rectangular, this square civilization, imagine with one button, suddenly all the buildings go into the ground and the most advanced buildings start rising. Can you imagine? You know, can you imagine like the might of such imagine such an advance? I'm going to write a story, actually. I'm going to write a science fiction novel of the Engineer King. Can you imagine with one button you press and the advancement of the world activates? Do you understand? It's as if like you being on the shoulder of one giant, and then suddenly you were lying down, not being clueless, you were even on the shoulder of a giant, but now you're like a ninja, standing on the shoulder of the giant, very alert, looking at where the giant is going, and even noticing the shoulders of other giants you can jump on. Do you know? And remember this, greatness is actually something that it's passed down like a torch, okay? And if somebody says, Mr. Within, what about your greatness? I would say it's not just passed down by all the beings and moments in this life where I have thought something is great. We're walking in the presence of those who have walked before. Nobody is alone in the world, but God is alone the world. And what God is it's very beautiful, because it's the suggestion that if the Creator is inconceivable, that means we are a non-human activity. We appear human, but we are a non-human. You know, it's like something that wasn't human invented humanism. And imagine just like an engineer invents androidism. You know, one day I envisioned like the most advanced companies, they're gonna hire philosophers. You know, because the philosophy behind why an idea is entering the world, it suggests its engagement. You know, believe it or not, one of the coolest things I heard was from this, I don't, to be honest, I don't know the guy's name, but he was one of those Shark Tank investors in the show Shark Tank. And somebody's like talking, like, you know, talking back to this guy, and this guy gives a next level speech, and he says, when I started to change my mindset from low value thoughts to high value thoughts, then my life changed. You understand? So we, this whole time, have been thinking the value is outside. Yo, is that a valuable car? You know, is that a valuable face? Yo, someone in the chat section said Heru in the building. If that's a referral to an ancient god, it's like, I know that dude. He's pretty cool, you know. It's like Hermes, yeah, man. It's like we used to play soccer with Hermes when we were in the spirit realm. No, I'm joking. Reality is incredible. It has a mighty presence. Everything is building up to something. Any human being, you might think that your value has to be just interpreted from your culture and civilization. Maybe not. You know, we all have an existential purpose where every moment of our life we're fulfilling. So a round of applause for everybody who's existing right now. We're literally, that's the purpose of existence, to exist. We're achieving it. But then, what is the purpose of our experience? What is the purpose of noticing all this stuff here? Comment below. Can you imagine, like, someone's tripping? Yo, what's the meaning? I'm going crazy. And at the end of it, it's like, all right, comment below in the chat. Man, this episode is so powerful. I gotta take off my jacket, guys. Believe that? So much wisdom in this moment that I gotta take off my jacket to take it off. All right. So I'm going to close the notepad. Viewers understood what I was saying by now. I'm pretty much saying the experience of the soul, consciousness seems to be alone in its own world, and then it notices other worlds. But fundamentally, everybody's alone in the way that Buddha says we all are born alone and we die alone. You know, even you might have siblings in this world, but this is the cool thing, that we're all like companions and either comrades on the same battlefield or the same crew members. People think a spaceship is something physical, right? They think a spaceship is like some next level, like aircraft, right? But what if you look at the sentence spaceship differently? That space is a vehicle that certain beings can use. And in some sense, a spaceship, I mean literal spaceship, where the space is acting as a ship as a sort of, you know, a conduit for the attention. There's something about this world where it's so weird. You gotta know what the thing is about before entering it, or it's kind of strange, right? Like, you look at an Olympic athlete, an Olympic athlete prepares for years and then for just one moment. And imagine, just like an Olympic athlete, as if you were a Buddhist looking at it, and you're like, yo, I'm training, reincarnating endless lifetimes just for one moment. And you know what you get in that moment? The trophy you get from being completely honest with the world and the self that only you can see, the you that only you know. You get to see what you are. That's it. The software and hardware are here for a sort of outcome. I keep thinking, why am I shaped in existence? Why am I a creature? I could have just been like the air. I could have been like, you know, the ocean waters. I could have been the clouds, but why this? And it's very obvious that there is a video game here. There's a character customization, which is birth, right? Then there's the mission and all the quests you got to complete in the lifetime. And at some point you log out. You log out of the world. And I don't know if anybody's like played a video game for a couple hours and then logged out. You feel like you've had it, but you also feel like you're leaving somewhere. It's bizarre. When it comes to the mind, it may feel like the way the mind changes in the inner realm feels like a subjective location overlaid upon the objective location is constantly changing. The nature of the mind is like, look at the mind. You know, this is my theory. Any people who spend long enough time, right, eventually their minds have, it's the content in the room. Do you understand? Like that guy in the Castaway movie was in the island so long with a freaking volleyball that he's like, yo, this fucking looks like a head, and those vegetables look like hair, and my blood can give it face. You give it a face. Do you know? Do you understand what I'm saying? It was as if there is something within us, within the software of, poetically, the software of the soul. Wow. Man, I gotta give a talk on this. The software of the soul. Softwares of the soul. It's something that right now doesn't mean anything because we're organic, but for the lost children of cyberspace, potentially, thousands of years from now, those children, like, imagine a child that's an orphan in a physical reality. Now imagine a child, a human being who's forgotten they're in cyberspace. They have forgotten they're like a biological entity, and they're just living in cyberspace, clueless that there's a biological reality out here. Those would be the lost children of cyberspace, and it would be a level of, heartbreaking cruelty, right? Like, I mean, I remember I read this story that I was close to, like, it was so dark, the story. It was something real that had happened. There's been some effed up people on this planet, okay? And when you go back in medieval centuries, it was even darker. It was more mad and chaotic. Do you know? The savageness. Like, I remember I read this story which, like, it broke my heart into pieces, but there was like this beautiful girl back